Okay, let's talk about it. That one number that defines so much of our professional lives, our salary. Ever really stop and think about how that specific number gets decided? It can feel like a total mystery, right? Like it's just a number pulled out of thin air. Is it based on what you're actually worth? Or maybe what the last person in your job made? Or, let's be honest, is it just what the company thinks it can get away with paying? Well, the good news is it's not magic. Believe it or not, there's a logic to it. There's a whole system at play with its own rules, pressures, and goals. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to pull back that curtain and break down the entire system for you. All right, first things first. Why do we care so much about pay? I mean, yeah, it's the money, obviously, but it's also so much more than that. It's about what that money represents. And this quote from our source material just hits the nail on the head. Pay decisions, they're deeply personal. I mean, they directly impact our standard of living, sure, but they also shape how we feel about our employer, our whole relationship with our job. That's why getting this stuff right is absolutely critical for any organization. So, the big question is, how do companies get it right? Well, they start with a kind of blueprint, and this blueprint is built on three really powerful and often competing forces. Okay, so take a look at this. This is the foundation right here. It's really all about a balancing act between these three things. You've got legal, the market, and the company's own goals. And it doesn't matter if you're a giant corporation or a tiny startup, every single pay decision gets filtered through these three forces. Think about it. A company legally has to pay minimum wage. That's a given. But the market might force them to pay way more just to hire the engineers they need. And at the same time, their internal goal might be to save cash, so maybe they offer more stock options instead. See? It's always a push and pull between these three. So let's start with the legal stuff. These are the absolute non-negotiables. Think of them as the guardrails. You've got minimum wage, which sets the absolute floor. Then there are rules about overtime pay for equal work, all these regulations that create a baseline that every single employer has to follow, period. Then you've got the market. And this is where things get really interesting because it's pulling in two opposite directions at the same time. On one side, you have the product market, what the company actually sells. That sets the ceiling. A company can only afford to pay so much based on its own profits. But then on the other side, you have the labor market. That sets the floor. You absolutely have to pay enough to attract and keep the talent you need, otherwise they're just going to walk over to your competitor. It's this constant, delicate balancing act. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the company's own goals. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to be the best of the best, attracting top-tier talent by paying way above the market rate? Or is their main goal to keep costs down as much as possible? It's these internal strategies that really shape the company's whole philosophy on pay. Okay, so we've got these three big forces. But how does all that theory turn into an actual number on your paycheck? Let's pop the hood and look inside the pay machine. It usually boils down to a three-step process. Step 1, job evaluation. This is where they figure out the relative worth of all the different jobs inside the organization. Step 2, they create pay grades, which basically just means they group jobs of similar value together. And finally, step 3, they set pay ranges for each of those grades, a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. And this is so important. That pay range isn't just about giving the company some wiggle room. It's a strategic tool. It's why two people with the exact same job title can have different salaries. But what's really key here is that it allows a company to reward a high performer with a raise without having to promote them out of a role they're great at. It helps keep top talent right where they're most valuable. So how do companies keep track of all this? Well, they have a neat little tool called the compa ratio. It sounds complicated, but it's super simple. They just take the average pay for a job and divide it by the midpoint of its pay range. If the number is greater than 1, they know they're paying more than they planned. If it's less than 1, they're paying less. It's like a quick, simple health check for their entire pay system. All right, we've talked a lot about the company side of things, but now let's flip the script and talk about what really matters to us, the feeling of fairness. Because you can have the most logical system in the world, but if people don't feel it's fair, it just falls apart. This all boils down to a fascinating idea from psychology called equity theory. And what it says is that we are all constantly, and usually without even realizing it, doing a little bit of math in our heads. We take what we get out of a job, like our pay, and we weigh it against what we put in, like our effort. And then crucially, we compare our personal ratio to everyone else's. Just think about it for a second. The last time you wondered if you were being paid fairly, who's the first person that popped into your head? Was it your coworker in the next cubicle? A friend who works at a competitor? That's it. That's equity theory right there in action. And we usually make two kinds of comparisons. There's internal equity. That's when you're looking around at your own colleagues inside the company. And then there's external equity. That's when you're looking outside, comparing your salary to what people are making for similar jobs at other companies. And for a company to keep people happy and motivated, they've got to manage the perception of both. Which brings us to our final piece of the puzzle. And honestly, it might be the most important one right now. And that's how this whole game is changing. The old way of doing things, the super secretive model of compensation, it's starting to face some major, major challenges. Yeah, those walls of pay secrecy, they're really starting to crumble. We're seeing new laws pop up all over the place that require companies to actually post salary ranges in their job ads. And just as important, there's a huge cultural shift. Younger workers, especially, just expect a lot more transparency when it comes to pay. And this push for transparency is shining a really bright spotlight on things like executive pay. I mean, just look at this breakdown. For a typical CEO at a big US company, their actual salary is just a tiny sliver of their total pay, like 13%. The rest? The vast majority comes from bonuses and stock. And when this kind of information gets out there, it just fuels the whole debate about what's fair and equitable for an entire organization. So I want to leave you with this final thought. In a world where pay is no longer a secret, what happens? I mean, really think about it. If every single salary was made public tomorrow, what do you think would change? How would it change the way we work, the way we value certain jobs, and how we as a society even define what's fair? That's a huge question, and it's one we're all going to be answering together sooner rather than later.